Good morning, everybody in the United States, and good afternoon in Europe. Welcome to our webinar about the new cybersecurity law in China. My name is Hans Fuchs. I am the Managing Director of CHINABRAND Consulting. With me is our jurist Mareike Seselbeck. She will talk about the legal side of the cybersecurity law. And John Lee is our engineer and computer scientist. He will address the more technological aspects. We plan to deliver the webinar in 3 parts. The first is we will talk about requirements of the tightened Chinese cybersecurity law. Second part is about recognizing and combating the Chinese cyber attacks in China. And finally, we have to discuss the need for action. We will give some recommendations how to react, what to do now.
So thanks for the introduction. I will take over now and I will start with the legal part. What are the requirements of the new Chinese cybersecurity law, or not so new anymore, but there are coming more new regulations by day. So I will start with a short overview over the historical development of cybersecurity law in China, which is quite relevant as some of these laws are still effective. So the cybersecurity law or regulations concerning cybersecurity and safety protection of computers can be traced back to the 1990s. The first law, the regulations for safety protection of computer information systems, is from 1994. And from this time on, there have been more and more regulations and laws on these issues. I won't mention all of them, especially as these laws you can see on this page are not that relevant anymore, even if they are still effective. Actually, the laws that are important is the administrative measures for the graded protection of information security in 2007. They are still effective, and they are at the moment one of the most important parts of cybersecurity law in China. The actual cybersecurity law was issued in 2016 and came into force in 2017. And it is the basis for all the other regulations that came later. As to say, the regulations in the years from 2017 to now are all supplementing the cybersecurity law and giving more detailed regulations on some aspects of cybersecurity and data security. So, which are the most interesting or important regulations that were issued the last 2 years? One of them is surely the measures to assess the safety of cross-border transfer of personal and sensitive data. So far, it's only a draft, but this is one of the regulations that will have a huge impact on most foreign companies, as the cross-border transfer of data is something that most international companies will do at some time. So this is a regulation that you should definitely keep an eye on, and you should know when it comes to effect, and you should act accordingly. One other important regulation is the information security regulation for the protection of personal data, which also came into force in 2017. This is a regulation that's pretty similar, or in parts pretty similar to GDPR. So if you are familiar with GDPR, you will, if you read these information security rules for personal protection of personal data, you will recognize some parts of it. It contains regulations on collecting personal data, what is allowed to do with them, what's not allowed, how do they have to be stored, what are the users' rights, and so on. But I will come to this later. And so the last regulation I want to tell you about is the rules for the supervision and control of internet security by the public security organizations. This is one of the newest ones, and also one of the regulations with most impact on companies. This regulation is supposed to regulate the enforcement and the supervision of implementation of the cybersecurity law and the relevant regulations. And this law or this regulation gives the police, the Chinese police or public security bureau, the competence to come to your company and check on your implementation of the cybersecurity law. I will come to this in a moment. So after this short introduction into history of cybersecurity in China, I want to give you an overview over the most important parts of the cybersecurity law. So the cybersecurity law can be divided into 5 major parts. The first of them is the security requirements for network operators. Network operators is pretty much everybody or every company who operates a network of computers or operates some internet websites. These requirements are relevant for pretty much every company. The second part is protection of critical information infrastructure. This is a really interesting part, and the word critical information infrastructure or critical information infrastructure operator is one of the most important words in this law, and it will be very important for companies to decide if they are considered a critical information infrastructure operator or not. The third part is protection of personal information. As I mentioned, the cybersecurity law does not only include cybersecurity regulations, but also includes data security. And in this regard, personal information and the protection of it is also quite an important issue. These 3 parts mainly contain regulations on, as I said, data, how data can be used, transferred, and how network operators have to protect their systems. So the fourth part of the cybersecurity law contains some regulations on the certification for products which are relevant for the cybersecurity or data security of a company. We will come to this later. And fifth part, one of the most important ones, is the legal liability. A law would not work if there's no punishment or fine if you don't comply with it. And as cybersecurity and data security seems to be an important issue for Chinese government lately, the fines and the fines are quite drastic, and it's not only that the fines are quite high, but also that the people who are held liable for infringement of the law or not compliance are also the relevant managers or the responsible managers, and the violation of the law may result in suspension of business operations or even the withdrawal of the business license, which means afterwards you wouldn't be able to continue your business in China anymore. As the cybersecurity law is quite long, especially if you also take into account all the regulations that have come after it, I will only mention some regulations which I consider to be most important for most companies, but of course there are more. So the first regulation, or the first bunch of regulations I want to talk about, is regarding network security. The Article 21 of cybersecurity law says that you should develop an internal security management system and also determine responsible persons for network security. this is meant for all companies, but there are more detailed regulations for bigger companies who definitely have to have security the officers who main task is to deal with data security and cybersecurity in the company. For smaller companies, it's okay to just have a responsible person who normally does a normal job, but if there are issues, will deal with the cybersecurity issues. Also, Article 21 says that you have to monitor your network operational status and exceptional network events. That means you have to be aware if somebody hacks your system, steals data, or if persons were not allowed to access the system, and do things they should not do or steal data. So also due to this, it is obligatory to store the network log data for at least 6 months. Other internal security management tasks which should be done are you should have a management of the management of the operating and information system. You should perform background checks on data security and cybersecurity relevant stuff. And you should monitor the computer network, especially network protocols such as DNS and NFS. Another part of the cybersecurity law is the identification of users. Since the cybersecurity law came into effect, network operators who offer certain services to its users have to make sure that they can identify the user. That means before a user can register for these services, they have to prove that they are really themselves and not some bot or another person misusing the identity of another person. So if a user fails to do that or does not agree to identify itself or himself, the network operator is then not allowed to offer these services to this user. And there is a very commonly used method for the verification, which includes the official NCIIC API. And this NCIIC API is an identity verification system which can verify names, personal IDs, phone numbers, bank accounts, facial features, and even more. So as I said, I will now come back to the collection of personal data. If you're familiar with GDPR, these regulations will sound pretty familiar to you too. The Chinese cybersecurity law, and especially the regulation on protection of personal data, say that the network operator has to provide the reason for collecting user data. So it is not possible to just collect user data because you want to have them, or it would be convenient for you to have them, or you can use them to sell more stuff to the users. So you're not allowed to do that anymore. And you also have to seek the consent of the users before you collect any data. So this means you have to inform them what data you collect and for what purpose you intend to use this data. And if you don't do that, it's illegal. In case of infringement by network operators, users have the right to require the network operator to delete or correct the data. Also, this is pretty much to GDPR, pretty similar to GDPR. This regulation actually complies with international standards, and users have to agree to privacy agreements before they register on a website. And if there are users that have registered for services or website or whatever before the law came into effect, they will have to agree to the use of their data afterwards. So here's the CIO. So what's a CIO? It's the Critical Information Infrastructure Operator. And as I said before, it's really important for companies to make sure that you're not one of them, or if you're one of them, you also have to know. But if you're one of them, you'll probably know. So what's a CIO? CIOs are companies who provide services in the areas of public communications, information, energy, transport, water management, finance, public services, e-government, or similar sectors. This is one of the definitions of CIO. As there are quite a lot of regulations and also regulations also dealing with CIOs, there are other definitions too, or maybe not other, but complementing regulations. For example, if you're processing particular risky data or very large amounts of data, you can also be a CIO even if you're not providing services in the aforementioned areas. And there is this regulation from 2007 I mentioned about the cybersecurity hierarchy. This regulation classifies companies into 5 levels of cybersecurity levels actually, and CIOs are the companies from level 3 upwards. Yeah. So what do CIOs have to do? The regulations or guidelines for CIOs are a lot more harsh than the regulations for like normal network operators. For example, storage of data. CIOs have to store personal or important data that they collected in China. So even if they have to transfer them abroad, they still have to store them in China. And if they transfer them to their headquarters, maybe in Chicago or whatever, then they have to make a safety review by the competent authorities. So they cannot just decide, I will transfer my data now. They will have to get the permission by the competent authorities to do so. So what will the authorities check? They will check if China considers this data to be relevant for their national safety or for the safety of its citizens. So if they think that the data might be dangerous or that it might be misused in the other country where it is supposed to be transferred to, they might not allow you to transfer this data. When the data is stored in China, it must comply with the national encryption standard. My colleague John will tell you more on encryption standards later. And there is a regulation regarding the transfer of data. It's called the Measures for Safety Evaluation of the Transnational Transfer of Data. So if you're interested in what rules are there for the transfer of data, you can check this regulation. Also, CIOs will have to do a penetration test at least once a year. That means they have to check the security of the network, including hardware, software, firewalls, databases, IDS, and so on. They have to identify potential risks like once a year, and they can do the test by themselves or look for a security service provider, but in the end they will have to report the result to the authorities. And the government or the relevant authorities can also make random checks on your network. So some more regulations for CIOs. You should or you have to do background checks of your cybersecurity officers. You should regularly give courses or trainings to your employees about network security, technical training, and competence assessment for the employees. And this is especially important as the awareness for data protection and the way data is treated in China differs largely from the way data is treated in Western countries. So even if in Western countries you have a new employee and you pretty much know that this employee will have a certain way of acting with data or will have an awareness how to protect data, this might not be the case in China. So don't forget that. Train the employees in China and don't just trust that they know how to handle data or that they know what is legal and what is not legal. And yeah, all these measures you implement, you should document them, and you should have this documentation ready at any time. So if there is a control or check on your company and on your cybersecurity system, you should have this documentation there and be able to show that you know of the laws and you try to implement them. So how's the cybersecurity law enforced? Companies can be inspected by the authorities. As I mentioned before, there's this new regulation allowing the police, the cybersecurity inspection police, to come at your company and check your systems. However, they will have to notify you beforehand in written form. Unfortunately, the regulation does not say how much before or how long before they come they will have to inform you. So potentially they could come to your company, show you the written notification of their inspection and then just do the inspection. This might happen, it might not happen, we don't know. So far it has not happened as far as we know, but you should still be prepared for inspections at any time. When there is enforcement, when there's an inspection at your company, cooperate with authorities. There's no use in telling them, no, you can't come in or whatever. Cooperate with them, and yeah, it's even illegal. I mean, you can be fined if not cooperating with authorities. The ministries that are relevant for the cybersecurity law is the Cyberspace Administration of China, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, and the Ministry of Public Security, which are also the ministries that issued all this regulation. And if they or the authorities underneath them decide to do the inspection in your company, they will be allowed to access and save network security related data in your company. So actually, they are only allowed to access and save the network security related data. So make sure that this data is stored at another place or like separated from sensitive company data. Don't mix this or don't put it in the same place. So liability, there are quite high fines for not complying with law. So far, only CIOs have been held liable for infringements. Famous examples of this is Sina Weibo. This is Chinese Twitter, actually. Baidu, which is Chinese Google, and Tencent, which is Chinese, well, Facebook and WhatsApp and so on. So far, Chinese authorities have only picked like really big companies to set examples. The thing is, if you do not comply with the cybersecurity law, it is not only the company that will be held liable, but also the responsible managers. So the fine is not only for the company, but also managers. The fine for companies is up from 100,000 to 1 million RMB. 1 million RMB is like roughly 130,000 euro. And the liability for managers, or the fine for managers, is up from 10,000 to 100,000. So, I mean, this is quite high compared to other Chinese laws. And The fine actually might be up to 10 times of the illegally obtained revenue. If, for example, you sold data or data was sold illegally, they will fine you with 10 times the revenues you obtained. And apart from the fine, you might also, or the managers might also face imprisonment, dismissal or withdrawal of the business license, which is quite serious, yeah. So I will now hand over to my colleague John, and he will tell you more about how to recognize and how to combat Chinese cyber attacks on and offline. So John, please.
So, hello everyone, this is John. So, as is well known that the three largest hacker producing countries are, first of all, China, and then Russia, and then the States. But when it comes to the Chinese hackers, I would like to say that there is a little bit different from what we are saying, the normal international hackers. Personally, I would like to divide them to two groups. The group one is what I call the red hackers, and the group two is what I call the normal hackers. So when it comes to the group hackers, then the majority of them are tool users, which I will explain it a little bit later. But the red hackers are the hackers that are fully agree with the Chinese Communist Party, and then they are patriotisms. So the normal hackers. The normal hackers in China will do the stuff that normal hackers do, like stealing your confidential data of your company and then sell it on blackmail, or paralyzing all your computers and the networks of your company and then blackmailing you, and encrypt your data, of course. So, but what they will also do is like they will do some tools, as I mentioned, and the famous one is like the DOS2, denial of service tool, which is called the low orbit cannon, which is also my favorite one. And they will like upload their tools online and then let the red hackers to use it and then paralyze the internet of your company, which is frankly a little bit low technically, but because there are many people using it, and then the combination of the family use computers is obviously stronger than your server of your computer. And according to the data of the Authority of China in 2018, that is a little bit shock to me, because even in year 2018, we are still facing the problems like SQL injection and XXX vulnerabilities. And later I found out the reason of it is like that the most of the companies, it's not bargain for them to support a full-time website designing team or something like that. So they just outsource their website designing to some kind of companies. And the worst thing of that is that the website designing companies, they are not safety oriented. They are like beauty oriented or design oriented. And then the second thing is that they have a model, and they will design your website and then like the same as the website of the other company. So which means that the hackers can use the hacking methods to your company and then to other companies. So which makes that your website is very vulnerable.
Let's talk about investigations in China. That's a quite sexy topic here. Everybody knows that it's not possible to trace back hacker attacks by digital means. If you try it, you will probably land on a server in Somalia or North Korea. But what we can do is send investigators on the ground to particular spots. The hacker scene in China is widely transparent. It's a huge scene. A lot of hackers are well known. Their faces and names are known. Their locations are known. They work in the network. They have publications and so on and so on. That means that it is possible to send somebody in this area asking questions. For example, I'm interested in a particular know-how about drone technology. The spot for drones is Xi'an. There are so many known spots for particular industries and technologies, nanotechnology, new material, sea technologies, and so on. We can send the investigator asking for technology. He's interested in buying this high-tech, this data, for example, for a location in Dubai or overseas, no? And he offers money. This type of field investigation is quite successful. So we find people, we can ask them, do you know others? And so ask step by step. And finally, we find somebody who owns the know-how, who owns the data, and he is probably responsible for the hacking activities. So while it is not possible to trace back by digital means, it is possible, not easy, possible, to investigate on the ground. That's a quite interesting example. So the FBI is currently looking for two Chinese hackers, members of the group APT-10. These groups are known. It's known that they are addressing special know-how for telecommunications, for example, 5G or materials, biotechnology. You know? So we can address them and we can search for these people, investigate them in China. During investigations, we can use a lot of support tools. This is not digital investigation. This is just a support tool. We can track and trace people who is related to whom, who has done this and so. So we have some means to find ways to identify people and their activities. So let's talk about action. The Chinese cybersecurity law is extremely restrictive now. So Western companies, both from United States and from Europe, have to act. They have to react. They have to install measures. What to do now?
So I'm taking over again. The first question you have to ask yourself, or your company has to ask, is are you considered CIO or not? This is actually not that easy to know. I mean, for some companies it's pretty obvious, but for like the companies that are in between normal like network operator and CIOs, it might be a little bit hard to define. So first question you have to ask yourself is, are you working in the relevant areas like e-government, telecommunication, transportation, and this stuff. So if you're not, that doesn't actually mean you're not a CIO, but it's a first step. So question 2 is identify your information and industrial control system and analyze your dependency on it. What would happen if this system breaks away, if it's disrupted, if it's hacked and cannot be used anymore? How dependent are you on the system, and what would be the consequences if this system broke down? And third point is analyze your dependency actually on the system, and analyze the consequences of the disruption of the system. So after you have checked all of these 3 points, if you are working in the relevant areas, if you have a high dependency on your control system, and if the disruption of your system does have quite a huge negative impact on China or on Chinese citizens, on economy, or a social negative consequence, then you're definitely a CIO. If you can only answer some questions with yes, or if you say, okay, I do not work in this area, but actually I'm quite dependent on my control system, and if it breaks down, the consequences are quite serious, then you will have to refer to the more detailed laws and more detailed definitions for CIOs. One more point to decide if you are a CIO or not is the amount of data that you collect, and the if it's personal data or if it's really risky data that you collect, and what would happen if this data is stolen or this data get lost, or if your system breaks down, what would be the consequences? And if the answer is that there are far-reaching social, economic, or national consequences, then you're also definitely CIO. If your answer to all these questions is no, you're probably not a CIO, which is a good thing. Even if you're not a CIO, what do you have to do now? As I mentioned, there are 5 levels of, 5 classes of companies actually, for which different regulations are relevant. So one thing you should do is decide which level, which protection class you're in. If you're class 1, well, there's not that much you will have to do. If you're class 2, there are more things you have to do. If you're class 3, you know how it's going on. Like there's getting more and more regulations and more things you have to pay attention to. So you should check the laws, check the regulations, also check the standards. Make a list like the one you can see on the screen right now, classifying or making an order from like the most important law, which is cybersecurity law, down to a not that important standard, and check all these laws on regulation that might be important for you or that you have to comply to, and then make a list of all these things you have to do, and well, start doing it. As there are certain things every company has to do, I will now mention some of them. You should definitely establish rules and operating procedures for internal security management. Obviously, this does not mean the same thing for small companies and big companies. For a small company, they won't need like a huge set of rules for internal security management, but still there should be some rules like don't connect your private cell phone to your computer, or rules like that, or don't take sensitive data back home with you from the outside of the office. For a big company, there will be a lot of things to do and a whole system to implement. Then you should take technical measures to monitor and record network operation and cybersecurity incidents, and you should store the relevant web logs for a certain time. If you are processing the data of more than 500,000 persons, you will need a own data security team, which is only doing like data security in your company. You should train your employees, no matter how big your company is. Give them the necessary information to decide how to deal with data, what to do with data, and what not to do with data. If you have data security relevant staff, like people who deal with very sensitive data or with a huge amount of data, you should consider doing background checks of these staff to make sure that that they are reliable and safe. You should also create an emergency plan for cybersecurity incidents to assure management of system leaks, computer viruses, network attacks, and other risks. Of course, these emergency plans is also different for small companies compared to big companies. But for small companies, it might only mean like have a backup of your system. For bigger companies, obviously, it means also considering what they have to do if there's a huge data leak. How can they protect the persons whose data has been leaked, or how do they have to react on this? And then there is the annual data protection impact assessment. This is pretty similar to GDPR also. It's you should once a year assess what impact the data you are dealing with if it gets lost or stolen, and if your way of dealing with this data is still compliant with the law and still enough to assure the protection of this data. And once more, it cannot be said often enough, don't forget the documentation. Write down what you did and do that in detail so that you can use it when the authorities check if you are compliant or not. So one more thing that is important for cybersecurity law is the certification and security review. So there are actually two questions you have to ask yourself. Are your network products certified? And are you prepared for safety investigation? And my colleague John will now take over and tell you more on this.
So hi everyone, it's John again. So before I get into the certificate agreement, I would like to talk a little bit more about the legal requirement. So as my colleague Mahaikat said, that the law system in China is a little bit complicated. It's like we have a main rule and then we have some sub rules according to the main law, just like the system rating we mentioned here. Frankly, the system rating law is not introduced in the cybersecurity law that's introduced in 2016. It's introduced during 2006. So, but the thing is, at that time, that people didn't really pay attention to the law, not the government, not the company, and not everyone, because computers, networks are not popular that days back in China. But since the enforcement of the cybersecurity law, that the Chinese authorities suddenly realized that they can also take advantage of this law and then raid the systems. So the same thing happens to filing and conformity check and the data storage and transfer and data encryption. We all have some GB laws, which is not laws, the requirements. GB are basically the IEEE internationally. So the hard and software implementation. I understand that for most of the companies that they have already installed their gatekeeper, firewall, VPN server, whatever, and then for the most case that the parent company will install their child company in China the same equipment, the same set, 100% same set as they install in the States or in Europe. Technically, it works 100%, but legally, it's not. It's like if you are going to enter the Chinese market, all your stuff has to fulfill the Chinese requirement, which is the Chinese IEEE. I would like to take the VPN server and the encryptor, for example. As you see on the next slide, that the encryptor without an OSCCA certification is not allowed in the Chinese market, which means that I did a statistics. I did a survey in Europe. 50% of the encryptor cannot fulfill the Chinese GB law or here OSCCA law, and then nearly no VPN server can certify the Chinese law. So we recommend that you are going to install the. We recommend that you check all your hardware equipment first, and then see if it fulfills the Chinese law, and then if not, you are going to replace it with some equipment that fulfills simultaneously the international standards and the Chinese standards. Like the VPN server in China, that there is a brand that can support both encryption, the international one and the Chinese one, and then you can just use the international one in case that the authority's checking comes. So when it comes to the software implementation, that I will also recommend that you are going to install the data leakage protection, which is not required by the cybersecurity law, but it's very good to anti-data leakage, and the office security softwares. So the penetration test is required by the cybersecurity law at least once a year, and then do yourself or do by the third party, and you're going to document it. And we also recommend that you are going to, for the documentation, you are going to do the GB GB standard, and then for your own safety, we recommend you do according to the OWASP standards. And China do not accept the international standard, which is famous, but the weird thing is that when it comes to the courses, the international courses and international certifications are very popular in China. For example, that the courses for all kinds of employees and the courses for experts, cybersecurity team, or the courses for the IT teams. We recommend that you take the courses, the basic courses for all the employees and the CISSP courses for the cybersecurity experts.
So thanks, John. So what can CHINABRAND do for you? Actually, we cover quite a wide range of services in this field, covering compliance tests and trainings, and also hardware and software relating services. Regarding compliance, what we can do is analyze the legal conditions in China, develop a strategy, and help you to implement all the measures you need to take to be compliant with the cybersecurity law. This also includes tests, actually. We can do the safety classification. We can help you to decide in which security level, protection level your company is in, and we will help you to find the relevant laws and relevant things you have to do to comply with the law. We can do penetration tests and simulated attacks to check the security of your hardware, software, firewall, and databases, IDS, and so on. We also offer the trainings, cybersecurity trainings in Chinese, German, and English, whatever you need. And we can do assessment of your hardware and software and help you to develop a system that is compliant with the Chinese laws. So if you're interested in our services, please feel free to contact me anytime. And yeah, you can do it via using this email address, info@chinabrand.de. And we will now take your questions. 1 second, please.
So I have to open the window here, the little window for questions. A remark for the implementation in China, we have a team in China of around 30 computer experts, programmers, and informatic experts. So we do this in China. Some questions, let me check. Yeah, that's interesting. What do you do if you identify a hacker by investigations? We cannot do the enforcement also. This is crime. Hacking is crime. And the Chinese authorities are very strict against hackers. So you can trust them. What we do is pre-investigation, and we have to deliver the results to the internet police, so-called internet police in China. We work closely together with them. You can trust them. China has very dramatically increased their activities in anti-counterfeiting and data protection, know-how protection. So we are only the starters. We have to give it the results to the authorities. Other questions? That's from Mareike, can Chinese authorities check our systems without an announcement?
Well, this is, as I said, the regulation concerning this issue is not that clear, but what it is clear on is there has to be a written notification, but it doesn't say clearly when this notification has to be sent to you. So actually, yes, they could. I mean, they could stand at your company with a written notification showing it to you, and then do the check on your company. But the law says they have to send the notification to you like in a reasonable time before they do it. So this is a question of interpretation. So far, I have not heard of any cases where the check was not like where the company was not told before that there will be a check. So hopefully spontaneous checks will not happen, but the law isn't clear on this point.
Okay, other question. We are a small company and have only a sales office in China. Is the cybersecurity law relevant for us, or are we too small?
Basically, the cybersecurity is relevant for any company operating a network in China. So as your sales office will probably have a connection to your headquarters, and it will have computers, and depends on how many people are in there, but there will be like an internal network also. Yes, the cybersecurity law is relevant for you, but as this is like a really small company or a really small sales office, there are not that many regulations on what you have to do actually. So the only thing you should do is make sure you know what like security level your company is in. Like if you'll probably be class 1 then, and make sure that that your hardware is compliant with the law, because this is something that is relevant for every company. Yeah.
Next question, what's the role of the Chinese state, the government in cybercrime? I would say that we should not overestimate the activities of the Chinese state, the military, for example. It's always said the Chinese state, the Communist Party, the military hacks us. I think this is wrong. The most hackers come from networks, private hackers, linked with companies, high-tech companies, research organizations. They often have a network, and they are interested in the technological data, the know-how. Compared with the Russians, the Russian hackers are focused on money and political influence. Not so the Chinese. The Chinese look for technology, and so it's not the state. The hackers are normally, or in most cases, business people, business-related people. What is your opinion, John? The state is not the big attacker.
No, the state. So, as my opinion, that the state is not the big hacker.
Private networks from universities and private companies looking for a specific know-how. No? Okay, we have some more questions. What is your point of view about using Huawei equipment? Safe enough? Good question. John. Huawei.
So Huawei, it depends on what kind of equipment that you are going to use. Like if you are going to use a Huawei cell phone and then running a Chinese ROM, and then absolutely there are no safety guarantee. And then if you are going to use some Huawei open source stuff, like I don't know, it depends on what kind of software you are using. It's like if you are using the Huawei Gatekeeper or Huawei Switcher, then it's totally okay. So it depends on what you are using.
The question regarding Huawei is, can we trust the Chinese Communist Party behind? Can we trust them? It's a political question. If the Chinese government and the Communist Party ruling the state is interested in particular data, for example, from regarding self-driving cars later in Germany or wherever, they will address Huawei. And Huawei has, in my opinion, that's my opinion, has to react. They have to respond. They cannot reject this question from the Communist Party. So that's the final question: can we trust the Communist Party and the political system?
Yeah. No? From the political part, that we cannot trust Huawei, but from the technical part, it's like Huawei have some open source equipment which you can trust, but there are the minority of the stuff of Huawei is the like not open source, and then you frankly cannot, and there are backdoors. And why I'm saying that you cannot trust Huawei cell phone is that they are for sure, and it has been proved that there are backdoors of your Huawei cell phone. And for the other equipments, they are not proved yet, not very solid evidence.
Question, what about the social credit system? That's an interesting question. I think if you have problems with the cybersecurity, if you do not install measures or so, you are at risk to be announced in the system.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question. The social credit system is a huge thing in China right now, and a lot of companies have sleepless nights because of it, or don't know what they have to expect. And of course, being not compliant to cybersecurity law is a big issue, and this might have impact on your social score. And but what has to be said is the authorities will at some day check your system, and they will check if you were compliant or not. But they will give you the chance to optimize your system and to erode any errors or any weak points in your system. So they will first give you the chance to make it better, and if you then still do not do what they want you to do or what is compliant with the law, then it will definitely have an impact on your social credit system score. But this is the same with all the laws in China. If you do not comply to them, this will have an impact on your social credit system score. Yeah, so it is important to comply and to cooperate with authorities when they come and check if you implemented all the necessary measures.
Final question, we must come to the end, that the time is over. Final question, we are a European company with a subsidiary in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is not mainland China. What about this related to cybersecurity?
So as it's already, Hans already said, Hong Kong is not China. So the cybersecurity law is not effective for Hong Kong. So if you are in Hong Kong, you won't need to implement the measures that are required by the cybersecurity law. But as soon as you have a sales office or rep office or a factory or whatever in China, you will have to comply to the Chinese cybersecurity law, even if your headquarters in Hong Kong. At the moment you have an office or something like that in China, you will have to comply to it. If you stay in Hong Kong and only sell to China, then you won't have to comply to the Chinese cybersecurity law. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have to close the session now. Thanks for listening. We will upload the webinar on our YouTube channel, YouTube China Brand Consulting. You find a lot of presentations and webinars. If you are interested in the charts, please send an email, info@chinabrand.de. And you American guys, if you are interested and there's a strong demand, we can discuss a seminar or workshop in our Boston office. We have an office in Boston, and if there are some people interested, we can later in the year have a seminar or workshop about this topic. Thanks a lot for listening, and let's keep in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.